Shavua Tov, great to be here. I want to learn today, B'ezrat Hashem, for Refuah Shlema. Shavua Tov, for Refuah for my dear friend and teacher, Rav Eliezer Ben Zion Ben Chaya Golda, Yehuda Eidel, El Narafana Lo, El Narafana Lo, El Narafana Lo. ירוצו מלפניך אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו שלא יראה דבר קלה על ידי ולא אששה דבר הלכה וישמחו בי חבריי שלא על טמא טהור ולא על טהור טמא ולא על מותר אסור ולא על אסור מותר ולא ייכשלו חבריי מדבר הלכה וישמח בהם כי אדוני ייתן חוכמה מפיו דעת ותבונה גל עיניי והביטה נפלאות מתורתך. Little revisit some of the conversation from the last week and maybe the last couple of weeks, okay? There is one God, no question. It's not subject to discussion. That's it, okay? When I say that people worship different gods, I mean that it's not just that people are trying to worship the same God in different ways, right? To go back to, to use a metaphor, if you will, that I use a lot, like for example, when teaching Tanya, right? We face a curtain. And there are little holes in the curtain, there are little gaps in the curtain, okay? God's behind the curtain. We face the curtain, and that's all we know. We focus on the curtain, and we try to penetrate the curtain, and every once in a while there's a little breeze, and maybe a little gap opens up, and we see through the curtain, and then it closes again, okay? Most of us, I say us, I don't mean you or them, I mean all of us, most of the time, we look at the curtain and we think that that's God. And because it's a curtain and it's a blank space, we project onto it whatever is important to us in terms of how we relate to God. And we look at the Torah itself, it says God is merciful, but it also says God is vengeful. It says God is loving, but it also says God is angry and enraged. It says that God loves us, but it also says that God regretted having created us. Okay? So the question is not which is it, the question is how do we in our lives, B'ezrat Hashem, try to see beyond that. My whole purpose for myself in anything that I study is to challenge my own assumptions. Because I always go by the fundamental assumption that whatever I know may not be true. And in fact, there's a very, very good chance that it's either completely or largely not accurate, not true. And
do you ever have a time where you're satisfied your assumption is correct?
I am very satisfied about my two assumptions that are my only assumptions in my theology. And in the first one I know I'm right, and the second one I'm satisfied that I'm right. First one is that I don't know anything about God. And the second one is that nobody else knows anything about God. And those two assumptions I'm very comfortable with. And anything else is problematic. But we said way back at the beginning when we started learning the Yesodei Torah, that was many, many pages and many months ago, that we're doing something in this year which is not the typical way to approach halachic texts or rabbinic texts or Rambam, which is that we're always trying to bring our relationship with God into this. So basically, we are, constantly talking theology. And all of the mitzvot reflect an approach to our relationship to God. And so I think instead of just saying, what's the halacha? You want to know what the halacha is, go on Google. You want to know what the halacha is, like it's in a book. We don't need to sit here and try to rack our brains and turn our neshamot inside out to try to understand what the halacha is. What we want to try to understand is how do we improve ourselves as Hashem, as individuals, as a society, and how do we do that in a way that helps us to connect to God. And so all of these, the halachas here, Hilchot Avodat Kochavim, halachas of Avodah Zarah, first of all, there's a reason that this is a very, very long sefer. There's an awful lot that the Torah has to say about Avodah Zarah. Rambam, among others, will tell you that perhaps the fundamental project, if you will, of giving Torah is to uproot Avodah Zarah from the world, to instill in the world the worship of the one God. Now, what does it mean to be the worship of the one God? I think we're here to get Shavua Tov, welcome. we're here together as, Torah observant Jews, Baruch Hashem. It doesn't mean that we're all doing it the same way. It doesn't mean that we all agree with each other. It doesn't mean that we all have the same image of what God is, much less the right image of what God is. But we're following, as Rambam says, we have the Torah. It's the best path. Okay, no other path has come close to it. And Agav, I will say that at the very end of Mishnah Torah, the next to last chapter of Hilchot Melachim, which is the last sefer of the whole 14 books of Mishnah Torah, the next to last chapter, he says, Jesus and Muhammad came into the world and they brought a lot of problems with them.
What?
A lot of trouble. A lot of problems. That Jesus and his followers caused us to be massacred, and Muhammad and his followers didn't do us any favors either. But, says Rambam, God's ways are mysterious. We don't understand why these people are in the world, but we do understand that each of these religions, he says, is kind of a way station on the road towards the proper worship of the one true God. So, as I understand Rambam's view, he says that Islam is a true religion in as much as it is a monotheistic religion. I'm not convinced that he says that they are worshiping the right God. And he says that Christianity is useful in as much as it moves towards, or at least it says that it's a monotheistic religion. Trinitarian Christianity, like Catholics with the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, not to mention the Virgin Mary and all these other things. That's a problem for Rambam. But he says that they're moving in the right direction. And
What about
Zoroastrianism?
Yeah.
Well, I think we dealt with Zoroastrianism way back when Yeshayahu speaks to Darius and says, Ani Hashem oseh shalom uvorei ra. I make peace, I make wholeness, and I create evil. Right? And the approach to Zoroastrianism, which is it's articulated in Tanakh, which is you believe that there are two deities, that there are two divinities, that the world is a fight between the God of good and the God of evil. And there are many different forms of this, where there's a belief that the God of evil is the one who created the physical world, and the God of good is the one who creates the spiritual world, and they're always fighting with each other, right? So I think it's, as I understand, I would say that Rambam would say that is the fundamental definition of idol worship, even according to Rambam, or especially, is you make little statues of wood, you make little statues of stone, and you bow down in front of them, right? Fundamental definition of non-monotheistic religion is something like Zoroastrianism, where you have two deities that are fighting with each other. And it's still hard today for us to get our head around it, right? Which is why we have to remind ourselves every morning that Chazal put it in our tefillah as it's one of the first things we say every morning we wake up, right? And we changed it to Varei Hakol, because we don't want to remind ourselves every morning that God also brought evil into the world. It's challenging. So now we are up to the laws of the Megadef, the blasphemer, which is in Yana Diyoma, because it was the end of the parsha that we read yesterday. Remember that they took the blasphemer out and they stoned the blasphemer to death. Okay, we have a slightly shortened shir today because we're going to have a party, which is good. Lag Omer is my Hebrew Jewish birthday. Next week, Parshat Bahar is my Bar Mitzvah Parsha. But since it's a double Parshat Bahar Chukotai, I get like two for the price of one.
How young is Kivodo?
Kivodo is I'm a 27-year-old trapped in a 60-year-old body. I'm 60-something.
The difference. The Samson.
Something. Okay, so I want to make a couple. We have an interesting halachic point to discuss as we come, Be'ezrat Hashem, to the end of this parak. So these are the laws of the Megadef, the blasphemer. Blasphemer is not liable to be stoned to death until he states God's unique name, possessing the four letters, right? The name, as we say, of Adnus, right? And curses the name with one of the names of God which are forbidden to be erased. So if you remember, there were 7 names of God which are forbidden to be erased. We learned this way back when. We can go back and review it if you like, but they consider names like the name of Adnut and the name of Yud K Vav K are prohibited, being erased. And so those who state that one is liable for execution only when one blasphemes the name Yud K Vav K, that's one opinion. Says Rambam. However, I think, and this is very important, יש מי שמפרש שאין לו חייב אלא עד שם יוד יוד וה' וו' וה' ואני אומר שעל שניהם הוא נסחר. So very few places in Mishnah Torah Rambam says, and I say. And when he's saying that, he is telling us that this is his own interpretation of the halacha. Everything else that he says in Mishnah Torah comes from somewhere. It all comes from the Gemara. It all comes from has very, very strong underpinnings. Comes from very, very strong traditions. It is Shuatov. Come on in. All right. And one of the controversial things about this book was that he did not cite all his sources. He didn't say, well, in Gemara so and so, and this one, and that's in the argument, and here's the maskana. Remember, he says at the beginning, people don't teach Gemara the right way. Consequently, most people who learn Gemara the wrong way, and they end up thinking that the whole purpose of learning Torah is machloket. They think that the purpose of learning Torah is to tell each other that you're an idiot and you don't know what God really wants. He says, I've done all the hard work. I understand what this is. I'm going to tell you, read my book, the only book you'll ever need to get you through the day. And in fact, halavai, we should all live our lives according just to Mishnah Torah. It would be gewalt. It would be amazing. And
with no citations.
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, this is, let me put it this way. Rambam is one of the people that I have a really, really hard time arguing with, telling him that, I think you did it wrong. And particularly when he has the intellectual honesty to say, I don't have a source for this, but I've studied everything. And va'ani omer, he says, there are people who say that you only get executed if you blaspheme using the four-letter name Yud Ke Vav Ke. He says, but I say that it's in other instances as well, that there are different names. I don't know.
Is that unique to Rambam?
That he says va'ani omer?
That no citations.
I would say it was certainly unique at the time that what he did a few things that were unique. He was the first person, and maybe to this day, he was the first person to do a systematic commentary from beginning to end of all of Mishnah. Up until his time, Mishnah had been kept around as like a reference book in the yeshivot and in the academies in Surah Pombedita, for example, the Gaonim, and they would learn Gemara, and then once in a while they go back and they look at the Mishnah to check, does this lead to this and how do these connect to each other. But he wrote his first major work, right, when he was in his early 20s, he wrote a commentary on the entire Mishnah, which sees the Mishnah as a work in itself, which is already groundbreaking. Okay, he wrote this book, Mishnah Torah, where he puts together all halacha. So later on, we're familiar with Shulchan Aruch, which is the guide to halachic living. It's one of the major halachic works that Jews all over the world rely on for halachic guidance. Right? Shulchan Aruch was about all of the mitzvahs that are applicable to us today. Rambam Mishnah Torah is about all the mitzvot in the times of Beit HaMikdash, and not in the times of Beit HaMikdash. In the times when we were sovereign in the land of Israel, and in the times of Galut, and in the times of Mashiach, when Bezrat Hashem we will be returned to Tzion, and all of the mitzvot, the sacrifices in Beit HaMikdash, and all of the mitzvot taluyot ba'aretz, the agricultural mitzvot, for example, of Shemitah and so on and so forth, will all apply again. Okay, and so as I think it was what's his name? Dr. Sherwin Newland, who wrote this really good book, really good biography of Rambam, he says, Mishnah Torah Rambam envisioned it as a constitution for the future state of the Jewish people.
So we don't have a constitution.
Nachon, separate issues. That's not for now. Shulchan Aruch also does not quote sources, for example. But perhaps one of the reasons that he was able to do it the way he did it was because because the Mechaber, Rabbi Yosef Karo, was a Rambam expert, and he was well schooled in Rambam, and so he probably said, well, there's precedent for this. I'm just going to tell people how to behave. And if you want to learn how to behave based on how to derive how to behave, this is not the book for it. Okay, Rambam's approach is it's very powerful. He set himself up as a major authority, and he was indeed accepted as a major authority. And then, some people argued with him. And one of the reasons that they argued was because I think one of the methodological reasons that they argued with him was because he did not give these long derivations of this masechta, this rabbi, that rabbi, and but at the same time, the people who have gone back and reconstructed, Rabbi, good to see you, have gone back and reconstructed his learning. It's I think it proves out to be pretty solid. So, but in general, yes, in general, when people give halachic discourses, when people give, write halachic articles, for example, or halachic shiurim in general, you will, you want to see that lineage of how the halacha, what the source is in the pasuk, what the source is in the Gemara, and how it's evolved and how it's been paskined over the generations up until today. There is only one Rambam. Does any of you familiar with the section in the Gemara and Sanhedrin that talks about the laws of the blasphemer and about the execution of the blasphemer? So it's, I think it's worth visiting for just a moment, that in the Mishnah and in the Gemara there's a formula that's said, and it's a euphemism, right? That when a person says, Yake Yosei et Yosei, may Yosei strike Yosei dead. Okay? And that's what's called Birkat Hashem, blessing God. In other words, it's a euphemism. The word blessing is a euphemism for the word cursing. The name Yosei is a euphemism for the actual name of God, the four-letter name of God. According to Rambam, either Yud Ke Vav Ke or Adnut. Okay, and again, in order for the death penalty to be imposed, in order for the Beit Din to impose any penalty, right? As we know, you need to have witnesses and a warning. Right? So if somebody says, oh, I'm going to go cut down that tree, and you tell them, well, you can't cut down that tree because it's Shabbat. So if you have two adult Jewish males who see this person, and he says, I'm going to cut down that tree, and they both say to him, you can't cut down that tree, it's Shabbat, and if you cut down that tree, you're going to be punished. And according to, I believe it's Rashi, you have to not only say that you can't do it, but you have to actually quote the pasuk that it comes from, and you have to specify exactly what the punishment's going to be. So, according to pasuk so-and-so, if you cut down that tree, you're going to get stoned to death, whatever. And the person says, acknowledged, I don't care, and cuts down the tree. Right there and there in front of the witnesses. Now the witnesses take the Beit Din, and the Beit Din says, did you see, blah, 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 blah. They accept the testimony of the witnesses, and the punishment is carried out. Okay? Chazal were very makpid on that whole process, I think at least for one major reason, which is that we don't want to get it wrong. We don't want to unnecessarily punish people, deprive them of wealth, of assets, and God forbid deprive them of their life. So the process of issuing a death sentence in the case of the Megadef, of the blasphemer, is very, very strict. And it's actually, just read it through in the Mishnah and in the Gemara. It's incredibly powerful just to read it. That the witnesses have to come in, Beit Din is there, and the witnesses say, okay, on 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning, this person came out and said, I'm going to curse God, and we said, oh, if you say this, and you say this, and you say that, you will get the death penalty. And he says, I don't care, Yake Yosei et Yosei, may Yosei strike Yosei dead. Again, the name Yosei being kind of the a euphemism for the actual name of God that the person said, right? So they go through this whole process, and then they take what the Mishnah calls the chief witness, which is either the one of the higher stature, or the one of greater learning, or the one of greater wisdom, or the older one, whatever, and they make everybody else go out of the room, and the judges stand and the witness stands, and the judges say, now, say exactly the words that you heard. They cannot carry out the death sentence until the witness actually says the formula, using the actual name of God, that he heard the blasphemer say. And then it's a very dramatic Mishnah. I mean, it's just like, wow, it's incredible. And then, so he says it, and they all rip Kriya because of the blasphemy of the name of God. And the other witnesses come in, they say it again, they rip, and then the death penalty is imposed. I will say that if you paid attention to what happens at the end of, hold on 1 second, please. Yeah. So here we are. So the next, he's going to talk about this, right? Which verse serves as a warning prohibiting blasphemy? Which is the a verse from the book of Exodus. Elohim lo tekalel. Do not curse God. Right? The procedure for the trial of the blasphemer, each day when the witnesses are questioned, they use other terms for God's name, saying, may Yoseh strike Yoseh. At the conclusion of the judgment, all bystanders are removed. The judges question the witness of greatest stature and say, tell us what you heard explicitly. He then repeats the curse using the actual name of God that he heard. The judges stand up and rend their garments, and they may not mend them afterwards. Right? If you've ever studied the laws of mourning, you know that you're supposed to rip Kriya. If it's, God forbid, you lose a parent, you're supposed to rip on the left side, and you're never allowed to mend it again. If it's another relative, you rip on the right side, and you may mend it again. You know? The second witness then states, I also heard what they heard, and if there are many witnesses, they must all say, and I heard the same. Okay. Okay. Here's an interesting halachic footnote, if you will. So the fact that a blasphemer retracts his statement in the midst of speaking is of no consequence.
Is what?
The fact that he retracts his statement even in the midst of speaking doesn't make a difference. Rather, once he utters blasphemy in the presence of witnesses, he is liable for execution by stoning. Should a person curse God's name with the name of a false god, the zealous may strike him and slay him. If the zealous do not slay him and he's brought to court, he is not condemned to death by stoning.
If you curse, let's say, Oto Aish.
No, the other way around. In other words, if a person says, okay, may Jesus strike Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, may Zeus strike, etc., right? So you're not allowed to do that. And if you hear it done, Shabbat Tov. Hi, good to see you. If you hear it done... Excuse me?
Transport from Ma'ale Domim is unreliable.
Oof, okay, but you are reliable. Thank you for coming. Good to have you here.
It's just annoying.
So he says that if you hear it on the spot, the zealous may strike him. But you don't take him to court over that. You don't take him to Beit Din over that. And he does not get the punishment that is specified in the Torah. Okay? That punishment is administered only when one curses God's name with one of God's unique names. Whoever hears the blasphemy of God's name is obligated to rend his garments. Even when one hears blasphemy of other terms used to describe God, one is obligated to rip Kriya. This applies when one hears the blasphemy from a fellow Jew. In that instance, both the one who hears the blasphemy and the one who hears it from witnesses is obligated to rip Kriya, to rend their garments. In contrast, one who hears a Gentile blaspheming God's name is not obligated to rend their garments. And actually, there's a disagreement about that in the Gemara, in Sanhedrin. But Rambam is bringing as a halacha that if you hear a non-Jew do it, you're not obligated. So in Yeshayahu, when Sancheriv laid siege to Jerusalem, Eliakim and Shevna rent their garments because Rav Shakeh was a Jew who had a renegade Jew, an apostate Jew. Sir?
Is Elohim one of these names?
I believe not, but let's double check. 7 names of God are forbidden. Yes, sorry.
I'm asking because in Italian...
Adnut, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, El, Eloha, Elohim, Elohai, Shaddai, and Tzedakot.
So if you hear a God blaspheming Elohim, what do you do?
If you hear a non-Jew blasphemy, you're not obligated to rip Kriya. No.
Okay.
Because?
No, because it's a very common curse
In Italian.
Say,
Yeah.
using the name God.
Right.
And I
Dio.
look- Yes,
Right.
which is Elohim. I look for the translation. What is the translation of Dio?
Yes.
They say Elohim. I don't know whether it's correct.
I mean,
or not.
Elohim is a
The Elohim is
complex
also
word.
Angel.
I mean,
It's a what word?
complex word because it has many meanings. It means angels,
Yes.
and it means also means like noble human beings and judges, right?
So,
So
if one curses in that way, it must mean the proper meaning, or just the saying is,
porco Dio,
yeah, exactly.
corpo del vostro Dio, right?
It's
Right.
very common.
Yes, because non c'è più religione.
Exactly.
Right. It's interesting. There's a story I heard from Rabbi Reisman, who, when he was a younger Talmid, he was studying with in the yeshiva with Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, and Rabbi Moshe used to give an open shiur once a week, and like people from the community would just come in, and he was talking about a sugya in the Gemara. I don't remember exactly what, but he was talking about this whole process about how the judges are supposed to behave and how one is supposed to behave in front of the judges, and the judges come in and the judges go out and the judges sit down and the judges stand up, right? And the word for judges is Elohim, right? So, and he was saying, Ha-Elokim come in and the Elokim stand up and the Elokim sit down and you come in front of the Elokim, and afterwards Rabbi Reisman and a couple of the other younger Talmidim went over to him and they said, you were talking about judges, not about God. So why were you saying Elokim? It's Elohim, right? Elokim is the name of God. He said, listen, this is an open shiur. People from the community come in. I don't know their level of learning. I don't know if they understand what, So if I start saying Elohim because I'm talking about judges, somebody might go home and say, I didn't realize you're allowed to just say Elohim like all the time, so I don't have to say Elohim anymore. So he said, it's all right to be on the safe side. From an abundance of caution, we use the term Elohim. Interesting. Which is a very important principle. It says kind of fits into the principle of Marid Ayin. Right? So Marid Ayin is that, we don't want to do behaviors that might lead people who see us to mistakenly believe that we're doing something that's prohibited and actually is permitted. Okay? You've all gone to weddings and bar mitzvahs where they serve a meat meal, and then at the end of the meal they serve coffee and they put the container of artificial creamer on the table, right? Why? There's a fancy meal and they got all the fancy, tableware out and everything, and then they put this little, wax paper box, like a milk carton, and it says artificial creamer, and they put that on the table. Why do they do that?
So people know it's not milk.
Marit Ayin, exactly. Right? So that
They
people
do
don't.
what? So it's not.
It's called Marit Ayin, the seeing of the eye.
What do they do so it's not milk?
So that people know that it's not actually milk. If you poured the stuff into a creamer and brought it out, somebody would look at it and say, I didn't realize you're allowed to drink milk in your coffee.
Or something?
So they actually put the container
Oh,
in.
because it's in the container.
It says coffee rich or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right, that's actually Shulchan Aruch talks
Instead of
about.
putting it into it.
Right, Shulchan Aruch says that on apparently there's a thing that on Purim, people used to serve a dish where they would cook chicken in almond milk. So it would look like you were serving, epis chicken parmesan or whatever, right? So the halacha was that's brought in Shulchan Aruch is when you do that you have to put almonds on the table. So the people who see it, so interesting. So if it's chicken with almond milk, because again, chicken, remember, famous three-way machloket in the Gemara, is it meat midoraita, meat midorabanan, or parav, right? And the maskana, the decision is that it's meat midorabanan, but it's very strong. Okay, so if chicken I'm serving with almond milk and I'm serving it in public, I have to put almonds on the table so people know it's almond milk. If chicken I'm going to eat in private and nobody else is around and I'm going to eat it with almond milk, I don't need to put almonds on the table. Because I know. Interesting. So watch this, okay? This is the halacha. So if I'm going to do something that might lead people to make a mistake about a halacha or prohibition midarabanan, in public I have to make sure that they see that there's a difference. I have to put out the container of fake cream or whatever. In private, I don't have to do it. if I'm going to do something that might lead people to make a mistake, midoraita, then even in private I have to do it. So even in private, when I eat my roast beef, my hot roast beef and potatoes, and then afterwards I pour artificial creamer into my coffee, I have to put the artificial creamer container on the table. It's interesting.
Who's going to see it?
It's fascinating how.
There's some nuts in the
No. I think the point is that the halacha is not just a thing that we do, but it's training, right? Because it's lasot siag laTorah. We want to distance ourselves from, if we wait till the very last minute, then we're going to go over. If we take the extra step, so it's one thing. We all do this, or at least I do. I don't know about. I'm sure that you're not subject to this, any of you, right? But it's like, yeah, it's okay. It's not a big deal, right? It's not a big deal. Yeah, okay. So everybody knows that Shvatov. Everybody knows that there's such a thing as par of milk, so no, that we have to keep ourselves in training also. So that's the way I understand, like, a lot of halacha is about, keeping ourselves on the right path. It's very easy once we allow ourselves a little bit of wiggle room, right? It's a slippery slope, right? Next thing you know, you're only waiting 3 hours between meat and dairy. Next thing you know, So, before the execution of the Megadef, of the blasphemer, the witnesses and the judges place their hands on his head and tell him, "You are responsible for your death. You brought this upon yourself." Only the blasphemer, and no other case of an offender who's brought before Beit Din and punished by Beit Din or executed by Beit Din, in no other case do the judges and the witness place their hands on his head. Right now, it was the end of the parsha. We all read it yesterday, right? V'samachu kol hashoma'im et yadehem, right? And they did as God had commanded Moshe. Okay? I want to suggest that interesting. So Parshat Emor. This is the end of this parak. So maybe we can take a little sidebar here, because I also have a halakhic issue that I want to go into more detail about. Parshat Emor starts out saying, these are the laws of the Kohanim. The Kohanim have to do this, the Kohanim have to do that, the Kohanim have to do it, blah, blah. And then it says, and Moshe enunciated this to Aaron and to his sons and to all of Bnei Yisrael. So I thought that was kind of odd. I said, well, wait, if these are the laws of the Kohanim, I get it that Moshe told Aaron and his sons. Why is he telling us? At the end of the parsha, we have the Megadef, the blasphemer, who purposely sets himself apart from the rest of us, and yet when we execute him, we put our hands on him and we say, no, this is your responsibility. Okay? Which to me, that resonates very strongly with the concept of the Egel Arufa, that when a dead body, God forbid, is found equidistant between two cities, and it's not identified, nobody knows who it is, right? If it's found closer to one city, then the people in that city take responsibility for it, and the other people are not, right? But it's found equidistant. So the Zkenim, the elders of both cities, come out, and they wash their hands, and they say, Yadenu lo shavchu et adam hazeh, our hands did not spill this blood. And Chazal said, yes, they did. You are saying this because you know that you're responsible for his death. Where they say that a stranger comes to your town, you open the gates, the stranger comes in, the stranger stays there for a while, then is going to leave, you open the gates, he walks out. The bandits are waiting outside of the town. They see this man walk out alone, they say, aha, here's a person that nobody cares about. Fair game. Because I'll say, if you had accompanied him even Arba Amot, if you just walked with him 6, 7, 8 feet, if the delegation from the city had walked out with him, the bandits would have looked and said, there are people who care about this guy. Maybe they'll chase after us if we, we'll go look for somebody else. If the delegation came from the other city to receive him, similarly, the same thing. Okay, so no Jew, and in fact, no human being who is a part of our kehillah, is part of our community, because certainly in the world of Tanakh and in Rambam's world, as he says explicitly, and again, it's very much enforced at the end of Mishnah Torah in the last book of Hilchot Melachim, right? Anybody who's part of our community, which includes non-Jews who are part of our community, right? We have an obligation to them, and we dare not abandon them. And so when the Zikanim are washing their hands over the unidentified corpse, they're saying, you know what, we really messed up. And similarly, I would suggest that Parshat Emor starts by saying, yeah, these are the laws of Kohanim, but you, all of Israel, you need to know about this because you need to support them in what they do. You need to understand what they need to go through. You need to understand the pressures and the requirements on being a Kohen who has to always be ready to serve on your behalf. And, it's not so easy. Okay? So they are not separate and apart. They're part of our community. And similarly, at the end of the Parsha, it says, oh, here's this blasphemer. You think that he's somebody who's not part of your community? You have to go and, you want to kill him? Go put your hand on him. Take responsibility. What drove this person? Because the only way to kill them is we gave them a warning. Witnesses warned them and said, if you do this, you're going to be executed. And he said, I don't care. What drives a person to that? And how can we as a society, we decide who's disposable? So it's a very, very difficult passage, I think, a very difficult moment. And I think the Torah is saying, not everybody can be saved, but we dare not consider people disposable. And so when it comes to the most difficult cases, we have to take some measure of responsibility, take some measure of acknowledgement. We have to take some measure of the extent to which the society may have failed this person. And that's incumbent on each one of us. And I think it's just one of the most incredibly powerful lessons.
This guy, this Megader, he tried to revenge his father's death.
He tried to avenge his father's death in this particular... And?
Nothing. I mean, there is worse than that. It's bad, but there is worse.
It also kind of begs the question of why it is that God needs us to protect God's name. But it's something that's very striking. It comes up over and over and over again that you get stoned to death for going out and gathering wood on Shabbat, but you write a check if you cut off somebody's arm. Right? It's like and we have it in this parsha also, an eye for an eye, and the rabbi said, no, it doesn't mean an eye. It means you're going to write a check. An ear for an ear, a tooth for no, you're going to write a check. Okay? But if you come too close to the Aron HaKodesh and you put your hand on it, boom, you're dead. But if you step out of line on Shabbat, boom, you're dead. It's very striking.
Because that's a sheep, it seemed, he didn't have any reason to Mechalel Shabbat.
We don't know. Yeah, but it seems not. Right.
Okay.
Right.
But the Megader...
The Megadef, yeah, we could say he has a reason.
But he's still even worse.
So I want to go, we have 10 minutes left because there's going to be a party.
What's the occasion?
Tuesday is Lag LaOmer. Huh? Tuesday is Lag LaOmer. It's also my birthday, but I don't think that's why they're having the party. It's my Jewish birthday as opposed to my slave birthday. 40, right? 40 something. You bet. Every chance. So we said a couple of paragraphs ago. Sir.
So, any commentary to share with us about on what basis punishments are derived? Fitting a certain offense?
I mean, the Megadef is given Beferish in the Torah.
Okay,
it's right there, right?
But so, how is the punishment? What makes it fitting punishment for a given offense?
I mean, in that particular case, this is explicitly what God says, right? So, how do you mean? Are you talking about like the halachic process? How do the rabbis determine how people should be punished for certain behaviors?
Mentioned, but there must be commentary about why this is appropriate. Death sentence in one, and relative slap on the wrist or something else.
Well, I would say that the broad principle is that that all of the ritual violations for which the punishments are so harsh, it's between the individual and God. And God says, I'm not going to take any guff off of you folks, right? and we can't really. I'm not going to say that there's a reason behind it or there's a rationale for it. Rambam would say that there is a reason for everything, for every halacha, and the ones that we quote unquote understand, we understand them because they're amenable to being understood by human reason, and the ones that we don't understand is because we can't pierce God's reason. But there is a reason. There are other thinkers who like the Sefer Kuzari, who says it's not a question of reason. It's just you do it because it's what God says to do. And the social halachas, like the rabbis say an eye for an eye doesn't mean we're going to poke somebody's eye out. It's all within the context of how to make the society function. And if you start, exacting physical punishment for a physical harm, you're just going to end up with constant bloodbath. As they saying, is right, an eye for an eye, and pretty soon everybody's blind, right? So the rabbis took upon themselves the whole halachic process, the purpose of the halachic process within the societal context is to help society to function. And not everybody gets quote-unquote justice, right? So we might say that God says if you violate the Sabbath, you're going to die, and that's justice. But we don't have the ability to know what is justice, to impose justice, and even if we were to say that it is in some hypothetical realm, it's just two people get into a fight, one person knocks the other person's eye out. Okay, well, you should have been careful, so we're going to knock your eye out. That might be considered just, but you can't run a society that way. So the rabbis are very, very careful on making things work. And as Rambam is one of the first to tell us, not everybody gets what they consider proper treatment or justice, and some people don't get fair treatment at all. The halacha and the Torah is not capable of dealing with and fixing every case. It's a more complex discussion than that, but I hope that that's helpful. I want to touch on another halachic point, if I may, which is so he said if the megadeh, the blasphemer, in the middle of speaking takes it back. Yake Yosei, I didn't mean it. Yake Yosei, no, what am I saying? I'm crazy. No. So there's a concept in halacha called toch kedei dibur, meaning in the middle of speaking, right? It's the amount of time that it takes to say Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umori, right? So, for example, Rabbeinu Tam explains if you're in the middle of a business transaction and your Rav walks by, right? You're obligated to turn aside and greet your teacher, right? So the amount of time that it takes, these words of greeting are not considered an interruption of the flow of the business transaction, right? You're about to shake hands and sign a contract, and your rabbi goes one way, Shalom Aleichem Rabbi Omori, my pen's still in my hand, right? I'm still in the middle of the transaction. I'm not walking away and starting a new conversation, right? So we see this, for example, so Rabbeinu Tam says if we considered this actually an interruption, then people would fear losing their livelihood, and they would be in a dilemma of whether or not to lose the business deal or to disrespect their Rav, okay? So, zechut chazara, the ability to retract one's words, okay? For example, you're about to eat an apple. Right? You didn't make the wrong bracha. You corrected yourself. Toch kedei dibur. Toch kedei, meaning in the middle of, right? So, in the middle of speaking. Borei Pereitz. Okay, fine. Okay. However, there are some things that cannot be undone. So it's an interesting. The Gemara defines toch kedei dibur in different ways. It also defines it as a halachic time period that's not necessarily related to speech. A person visiting a sick relative, God forbid, and the relative faints. So the visitor thinks the relative has died and stands up and rips kriya, and a second later the person sits up, and then they die again. And then they actually die. Okay? Ripping kriya is to be done after death. And when you witness a death, God forbid, you're supposed to rip kriya. It doesn't matter if you're actually standing there at the moment somebody dies, relative, not relative, you're supposed to rip kriya. Okay? So the relative didn't actually die, the visitor is required to rip a second time when they do die. Right? However, the Gemara says if the waking from the faint and the waking and the death occur toch kedei dibur, the first ripping is sufficient. So it's kind of like you haven't had a chance to be distracted by, you're still in the same inyan. Right? Tosfot discusses the case of witnesses who lie. Reuven takes Shimon to court, claiming that Shimon owes him money. Yehuda and Levi are called as witnesses. A court proceeding requires two witnesses, right, in order to arrive at a binding judgment. If Levi and Yehuda actually know the facts of the case, they're obligated to testify. If they swear falsely that they do not know the facts, then they actually they're chayav a korban. They have to bring a korban. So in this case, Levi swears falsely that he does not know the facts, and this deprives Reuven of the required testimony to collect his debt. Yehuda similarly swears falsely that he doesn't know the facts. Tosfot says Levi has to bring a korban since he swore falsely. What about Yehuda? The trigger for the korban is by swearing falsely, Levi denied the testimony, and that deprives Reuven of what he's entitled to in court. Are you following this? Okay? Am I making this clear? Yehuda can now say, well, Levi already swore that he didn't know. So I'm not costing Reuven anything, because he needs 2 witnesses. He already doesn't have to, because Levi already swore that he doesn't know. Okay? Levi's out of the picture. My testimony is of no importance. Tosfot says if Levi swore falsely, and Yehuda swore toch kadei dibur to Levi's swearing, it's as though they swore simultaneously and they're both obligated to bring the korban. Okay, like Levi swore falsely and Yehuda immediately says, yeah, me too. He didn't think about it. Okay, it's at the same moment. Toch kadei dibur is a single halachic time segment. Okay, anything that happens toch kadei dibur is considered to have happened at that same moment. So interestingly here, toch kadei dibur is not just one person speaking, but it's 2 people, right? So Levi says, oh, you know what, I swear I didn't see it. Yehuda immediately says, yeah, I swear too. Same halachic moment, right? If Yehuda says, you know what, Levi just swore that he didn't see it. Hold on, I want to talk to my lawyer. Goes out, he comes back, he says, yeah, I don't know anything. Okay. So he can then follow the reasoning of, did he lie? Yes, he lied. So again, there's a halachic distinction between whether you do something that is prohibited and you are chayav for it, you have to either bring a korban or be punished in some way, or do something that you're not permitted to do, but you don't get a punishment for it. Right? The famous case in the Gemara is somebody who, so the shi'ur, the required minimum amount for eating is kazayat, the size of an olive. However big you want to say, it's the chazon ish, it's bigger, it's smaller, whatever, but size of an olive, right? So the Gemara question is asked, right, if I have a half a chazayat of meat that's cooked in milk, am I allowed to eat it? The answer is, if you eat it, you are committing, and it's an isur doraita, it's prohibited from the Torah, you're not allowed to eat it. However, because it's less than a kazayat, you don't get punished. If you ate a kazayat or more, we'd whip you. It's less than a kazayat, so there's no punishment. You're still not allowed to do it. It's still Asher Me'at Torah. So in the case where Yehuda says, I want to go talk to my lawyer, he comes back a minute later, he says, yeah, I also didn't see anything about them. He lied. Not supposed to lie. That's Asur. But he doesn't get punished. He doesn't have to bring a korban chata. Okay? So, so the Gemara combining different passages from different Masechtot, there are 4 utterances, 4 things that one might say that cannot be retracted or changed toch kadei dibur. Avodah Zarah, Kiddushin, Gerushin, and Megadef. You cannot say, express your worship of Jesus, Joseph, Mary, whoever, and then say, oh no, I didn't mean that. You said it, it's Avodah Zarah, you did it. You cannot say to a woman, Harei at mikadeshet li. No, what am I talking about? No, you're married. You cannot give a woman a get and say, Harei gitech. Oh, no, wait. No, once it's in her hand, once you've said it, that's it. And megadef. Yake Yosei, no, what did I say? No, sorry, too late. Okay. The blasphemer, the person that says, may God strike one's own self dead. Sort of thing. And as we shall see, Bezrat Hashem, in the next parak, Rambam states explicitly that the exemption of toch kadei dibur does not apply to Avodah Zarah, which is what this whole sefer that we're learning is all about. In addition, Rambam has another case. It's in the case of korban, in halachas of korbanot. He says hekdesh cannot be retracted, toch kadei dibur, meaning that I say, I take this animal and I say I designate this animal as a korban. Oh, no, wait, I changed my mind. Nope, too late. You designate it as it's hekdesh, it's been sanctified and set aside to be a korban. You cannot retract that, even toch kadei dibur. So, look to the very beginning of the book of Genesis. How God creates the whole cosmos is with the act of speech, and our speech is no less powerful. That our words really, they have not just meaning, that they actually create realities. Okay, and we see this all around us in the social realm and the political realm, when people talk about other people and they say, you know, I heard about so and so to so and so. Next thing you know, they're no longer part of the society, no longer part of the community. That, you know, that we have in politics, we have people demonizing whole groups of people. Next thing you know, people are at war with each other. God forbid. Speech really matters, and I want to give us all a bracha that we should be mindful of, A, that we should be mindful of the words that come out of our own mouths, and B, that when, especially people that we have a relationship with, people that we, in different ways, people that we have a relationship with, when they say things that we find troubling, that we should not immediately judge them on it, but we should seek out an opportunity to have a conversation about and understand that perhaps what we perceived as being hurtful or as being said in anger was not quite the way we perceived it, and all the more so, you know, dan lekaf zchut of strangers, that when people say things that we find troubling, we should not automatically assume a whole list of negative things about them. Well, I see a person dresses a certain way, they obviously have this, these are their politics, this is their religious perspective, this, etc., etc., etc. But speech is incredibly powerful, and, you know, to the extent that we are, you know, the Sefer Kuzari has 5 levels actually of existence, right? There's the domem, the silent. There's the tzomeach, plants, which have some kind of life to it. There is chai, animal, which has life and also has mobility. And human beings are called midaber. We are the living, moving around thing that has the power of speech. Okay, it's very, very powerful. And of course, Sefer Kuzari, there's a 5th level on top of that, which is Israel. Okay, but Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen. Amen. Thank you, Chabad.